Okay, we are here for part two of John Mark Parker, and he talks about his clinical work at Triad Psych. He has so many specialties he does well that now we're going to talk about another specialty of his, which is working with LGBTQ adults and youth and the such. It's not something I really know that much about, to be honest, because I'm tied up with my own specialties. But at Triad Psych, it's a very big deal because we specialize in neurodivergence, and there's a very big crossover between neurodivergence and LGBTQ behaviors and the such. So I'm going to turn it over to an expert, and that's John Mark Parker.
I don't know how much of an expert I am, except that I am a part of that community. So I'm expert on my own life, and so I can relate to a lot of clients. I think something as simple as I have a trans flag up and a gay flag up and some different symbols around the room. And when clients have come in, even if LGBTQ issues were not their presenting problem, they've said, "Oh, I love your pillow," or "I love your rainbows." And it's just a reminder that this is a safe space for them to be who they are, and not only accepted, but celebrated for who they are. And I think that's, even though our society has made a lot of progress, we have a ways to go. And there are people who still feel threatened and unsafe. And these days, there are plenty of reasons to feel that way. So being able to share who you are completely with a therapist, I think, is important, especially when so many of us did not come from homes where the parents were accepting of queer youth or queer kid or somebody coming out, and people live in fear of, if people really know who I am, will they really want to be around me? And there are issues, particularly for people living with or who identify as LGBTQ community members. We see the world in a different way than our hetero counterparts.
And I want to know for myself, because like I said, that when we hired first Elizabeth,
right,
who's in that space, now you, and I only have so much of an attention span running the clinic. How do they or you view the world? What is it? That I want to know.
Well, we would all just have to sit down and talk about it, because it would be on a particular issue or something. It's politically, it's not that sort of thing. It's just Alan Downs has written a book called The Velvet Rage: Growing Up Gay in a Straight Man's World. I think it's the title. And the idea that
gave me that book, and I never read it.
Read it. It's a friend of mine who was
The Velvet Rope. I thought it was The Velvet Rope.
Velvet Rage. Well, there might be a Velvet Rage, but the Velvet Rage is the one that I'm talking about. And a friend of mine who was studying to be a counselor gave it to me before I had even wanted to become a counselor. She just said, "Oh, I think you'll like this book. I think you need to read it." And I read it, and it was very helpful. Some of the things he says are that we know from an early age that we're different, but we may not have the words for it or not know what to say exactly. But we know we're different, and that difference is probably bad, just because of the way our society is and the way our culture is set up. And so we grow up always wondering if we're enough, if we're good enough, if we measure up, if we're going to be accepted, if we're going to be loved, and that stays with us, many of us throughout our lives. So I think that's one of the ways that I can help with those clients, because I can relate. I understand. My family loves me. I'm out. People came around. It's all good, but I still feel sometimes different from them, and it's all good. I mean, I'm close to them. It's just it's good to know someone else in my situation that I can talk to. I find that very helpful. I think it's also important that they know that I can relate to them on areas like spirituality. Many of us, especially older queer folks, grew up in religious institutions that were not very hospitable for them. And many of us carry scars and bruises. I don't know if you've heard of conversion therapy, but that's a thing that happens still in the world, when even though science shows that you can't make someone not gay by sending them to therapy. That's not how that works. But it's still done. It's still practiced, and kids' lives are changed. Suicide rates increase when you try to make someone different from who they are, from who they know to be. And so for people to have been really religious and loved God, but to have God's people treat them poorly and tell them they're going to burn in hell, that creates a very difficult problem for them. And so I don't present myself as a Christian counselor, although I am a Christian. But when it comes up, spiritual issues come up, I'm willing to talk about them and pray or whatever people need to do, if whatever works for them. I have lots of experience in that. But I think healing that rift between religion and sexuality or sexual orientation is important, and it happens inside a person. And anyway, I love talking about those things. Sometimes our sexual practices are different from others. That's not always the case, but sometimes it is. And so I'm comfortable talking about that, and I've done some research in that area as well. So I'm not an expert in every particular issue, and I'm happy to refer people if I can't help them with something. But when it comes to LGBTQ issues, I'm here for them.
What do you think is the most critical competency skill for someone to work with LGBTQ?
Listening, and with an open mind and without bias. I mean, we all have bias, but as much as possible to try to have empathy, which is not how would I feel in that situation, but how do they feel? How does it feel to be them? Am I hearing what they're saying? Because it's what people say, and people can say something, but it's what we hear that is affected by our own biases, our own preconceived ideas, our own experiences. So I think a gay person or a lesbian or trans person or bisexual, however they identify, doesn't have to see someone just like them to make progress. What they need is a therapist who listens completely without judgment. And I think you can feel that. You can tell if someone really welcomes you or if they're just tolerating you. And there are too many examples of folks who went to therapists who shared something that the therapist considered out of the norm and made them feel really badly about it, just from being who they are.
None of this was even talked about until the 90s. Right. That growing up, I grew up in northern New Jersey, a small town. Everybody knew everybody, everyone was in business. And I had a friend growing up who clearly was gay. He was a man, but couldn't come out either. And the tremendous amount of substance abuse and eventually a suicide. Mm-hmm. And I have no question that part of what led to this was that he was kind of trapped as to what he could be or not be.
Right.
He would constantly escape to New York City. We were 45 minutes out of New York City and he could drive. And then he started going into New York, and that's where he got into some of the trouble. The crack epidemic was raging. And then one of the finest, most accepting, kindest people you'll know. Horrible loss to everybody. And, then when I went to graduate school in the 90s, finally the statistics were coming out about gay and lesbian youth, the substance abuse rates, the suicide, the rates of suicide and the such.
Significantly higher than their
very much,
parts. Yeah.
Very much higher. And then what could be done about it as well. So it's something that always affected me greatly in a major way. And we're now in a very different world.
Yes.
So what do you think of, like when I spoke to Elizabeth about this, she felt there were also certain challenges that maybe certain youth were saying they were part of this camp because they wanted to be accepted, not if they really felt that. Not if they really felt that way, how do you address that?
I listen to the client and I ask them questions, and I accept them for exactly who they are. And I think it comes out if they're trying on an identity to be accepted or to see how something feels, because that's part of being a youth too, is trying this and determining how they're going to present themselves to the world. And sometimes we do that for a variety of reasons. And so getting to the bottom of it and knowing that they are fine just like they are, whoever they are, is acceptable and worth celebrating and worth being loved. So I think that's the bottom line of it all. And then we figure out the rest is just trappings. I had a client recently who had always thought that he was straight, but he said, I'm attracted to a guy and I have a crush on him. And I said, that's wonderful. I said, so now you're worried that what it means about you. And he said, yes, I've always thought I was straight, but maybe I'm not, maybe I'm bi, maybe I'm gay. I was like, you know what? Let's not worry about the labels. What I see sitting across from me is a young man who is so open-minded that he is attracted to a person, not because of what their body is or their organs, but because of who they are. And I said, to me, that's a beautiful way of living in the world. So thank you for that. Let's worry about definitions later if we need to. Because why does it matter what the labels are? What matters is who the person is, and if they feel seen and heard and loved.
Yeah, I mean, when I do get a case like that, my big thing is self-directed self-reliance, that, you can be, you can choose who you want to be or not.
Mm-hmm.
I know there may be issues with religion and families and
right.
such, but as long as you're true to yourself and do it well, I mean,
right.
don't follow the crowd, make your own choices, learn how to think. And, adolescence is all about trying on different identities.
Right.
That's really what adolescence, and I think, when we see kids who in high school get lost and can maybe do very dangerous things because they don't really have an identity.
Right.
When parents tell me, for example, my son's getting very deeply involved in the band, I say, thank goodness, because the band is like a cult. But it gives these kids someplace to be when they're not in class. They have to maintain their grades to stay in the band. It's a very wholesome environment.
Right.
It gives them a group for when they're not in school, an identity. It's very rare I hear of band kids getting in much trouble. I just don't.
Well, there are plenty who do, because I was a band kid too. But
I don't hear about it. If it is, it's relatively minor. I've not had.
I would say it's probably I would be very curious to do research.
I've yet to have to go to the juvenile court to testify for a band kid. I know that may get me in trouble. That may get me in trouble in YouTube land, but I'll say it like bandies tend to stay out of trouble. I think
that's true. Well, and I think anybody who's on a team or in a group experience like that lasts all through their school years. And think about it too. We were talking earlier about mentors, a music teacher or a coach or a band director.
Band teachers,
you have them the whole time. You don't just have them for a year and then move on. You have them sometimes from elementary school through high school, and that relationship with a trusted adult beside your parents makes a big difference.
Right, and those band. I don't know if they're the right word, band leaders, band teachers, whatever you want to call them, they have almost a mythical role in the school and, with the students, and they love what they do. I mean, they love what they do, the passion for what they do. It just, there's no place else they'd rather be.
That's
true.
They're
with the band and they're marching, they're going to competitions, and it's absolutely wonderful thing. And of course, being an athlete is great. We know that, kids who play sports, their grades are higher when they're playing sports than when they're off season, even though they have less time.
That makes sense.
Well. So it makes a big difference. But making sure everyone has a role and a place is really very important as well.
There, speaking of the LGBTQ population or QIA, there's so many letters now that go with it. I just use queer as an umbrella term, and now there's queer history, queer art, queer. People are studying that, specifically gay people throughout history, trans people throughout history, that sort of thing. And I haven't studied queer history as an academic subject. I speak more from just my experience, and I'm learning things all the time. And younger people who are studying that educate me all the time about a variety of different things. One of the issues that queer folk deal with are, what am I trying to think of? It's when somebody says something that's kind of a backhanded compliment, or they didn't really mean it, but it's, oh shoot, I can't think of it, but it'll come to me maybe. But when people are saying something like, for example, someone is having a mental issue, but they look like they're fine, and for someone to say, "Oh, you don't look sick," or "You don't look upset," or something like that, it's what is that called?
Masking, you mean?
No, it's a term, and I even have a book about it somewhere. Microaggressions. That's what I'm thinking of. That's the word I'm trying to think of. Microaggressions. A lot of queer people face those because it's things that are said, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, that makes a person feel less than, or at least feel a little jab. And one person described it as death by 10,000
cuts.
Yeah. So it's those little things, and that happens all around in work settings and school settings and different places. It's finding a safe space for queer youth and queer adults even is challenging at times. And the good news is I think society is changing. I think the world is changing. I think eventually, because of young folks don't even think about it as much as we did. I mean, things were so defined when I was growing up that a person was this or this. And now people are not as concerned about those kinds of things. So I see hope for the future, but there still is a need now for people to be able to talk about issues.
I mean, I'm not a big fan of the microaggression movement, to be honest. I've got my reasons, but that being said, the thought of making anyone feel demeaned or hurt makes my stomach turn.
Right.
It just makes my stomach turn, and I can say that and not embrace these microaggressions also as well. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me that, you know, as a kid who was horribly bullied and teased, very dyslexic, you know, neurodiverse as well. I mean, I know what it's like to be made to feel like you wish you weren't alive.
Right.
And you know, and you've got to remember, you send your kids into a school. A school is a group.
Right.
And one thing we know about groups is that if they're not well led, they're toxic.
Yes.
That groups will eat themselves alive. I mean, Lord of the Flies, you know, the book and movie, unless there's someone in charge who's willing to have all of the primitive aggressions pinned to them. I mean, you go into a group, we've got jealousy, rage, something called splitting, relational aggression. I mean, you name it. You know, groups put people in positions where it's very easy for people to be shamed without anyone even trying. I think that's what I have to drill in people's heads, that when I teach, I have a conflict management seminar I teach at companies, and that's how I start the training, get everyone to groups, make it easy for people to be shamed without anyone even trying. And that could be, it could even be at a Triad Psych. It could happen at a mental health clinic too, that, you know, you're doing something or saying something makes someone feel badly. But, you know, if the person in charge is willing to say, look, the buck stops with me, and this is how we're going to handle ourselves, it just makes such a huge difference. And that's the same thing for my high school. During my generation, the bullying was pretty bad. After I graduated, it was a small school. It was only 500 students. A new vice principal came in who said, look, this is a small school. I can really make a difference. And he was, I don't want to use a curse word. He was a real, I don't know what the word is. He was a real no nonsense, very assertive, especially with the bullies. He'd be waiting for the bullies when they got off the bus, and he'd put his arm around them. So let's have a little chat about nothing. But his presence, the school environment, everyone made it clear it was so much better. So much better. You know, a really good film that was made right near our office is Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington. You saw that those two teams being integrated were ready to kill each other. He saw to it they all hated his guts, so they got along as well. So,
well, and you were talking about the school being a group environment that we send kids into. As we were saying earlier, with the phones and with access to the internet, it's not just a school environment. The whole world is looking at them, it seems. And with influencers and all those things, it's so easy to shame people even more, perhaps, because their world is bigger than ours was.
Right. And I don't think it's a good thing. I gave an interview to the Daily Dot, and the title of the article was my rapist just tried to friend me.
Wow.
That a woman who was raped, the man who raped her sent her a friend request on Facebook, caused a crisis for her. But in the interview, I made it clear that, you know, you and I grew up in a world where we had boundaries, that once I got home from school, I was safe. But we're now living in a world which is boundaryless.
That's a good point.
And bullies can get to kids anywhere, anytime, any place. And the social media bullying is many times worse of the things we faced. So how do you deal with bullying if you have a patient who's a victim of bullying?
Well, it depends on their age and the circumstances. And I talk to them about it, and we come up with a plan together. I think bullying should not be allowed. There's a book called Sticks and Stones where it talks about how bullying is such a huge problem, especially for younger people, but it can be true for older people as well, for young adults and adults.
You know, I teach a class called Advanced Psychology for Cops for 20 years now. And I say in the class, you know, who here can tell me the dumbest thing? And these are cops. These are very rough people. They're not sensitive at all. And I said, what's the dumbest thing that was ever said in life? And the dumbest thing ever said in life is sticks and stones can break my bones. Words can never hurt me. That is the dumbest, most false statement ever made.
It's true. It's absolutely true. By the way, there are some cops who are very sensitive. I just have to toss that out there, because I mean, but it's tough to do that. I think probably as a cop. But you're right. It's words, it's looks, it's there's nothing meaner than some middle school girls at times. I've had teachers tell me that, and it's we all have the potential to harm others, or we have the potential to celebrate and help others, and I think that's where we need to focus. I think bullying needs to be talked about with the client. If they're younger, then we talk about it with the parents and the teachers, and I'm happy to go to the schools and speak to people there if I need to. But it has to be addressed. It has to be called out. And even if the person claims they weren't bullying, it's a perception that matters. And so it needs to be a discussion that's had in whatever setting it occurred, so that can be nipped in the bud, or
two key data points here. People have forgotten about this in Georgia, but we do have very comprehensive anti-bullying laws in Georgia, and a lot of parents don't know how to utilize them if their child is a victim of bullying.
That's a good point.
But if I catch a school system, closing a blind eye to bullying, the principal gets an email from me where I quote the laws and make it clear I'm going to the state. Watch how fast they react. Very fast.
I'm sure.
But sometimes they get forgotten about. What do you do if you have a patient who's a perpetrator of bullying?
We talk about it. We address it head on. And I would say, why are you? I mean, I would just ask them to explain what's going on. What are you doing? Maybe they don't realize they're bullying. So I think that needs to be brought up. But if they do know it, then I consider that, intent to harm somebody else. And so we have to talk about what a serious problem that is, and how it's, if they can't work on that, I don't know that I don't know how helpful I would be as their clinician. Because I can't.
A lot of these kids who are chronic perpetrators of bullying, they often are, well, women, like you said, females do it too, but especially for the men, that oftentimes they're witnessing domestic violence at home.
Well, and because they that's what they've seen and they've grown up with, and that's the pattern. Even people who are the recipients of that. I know a young woman, we were talking about it this summer, who was being mistreated by her boyfriend, and she said, and she's well educated and she's smart. She said, I just don't know what to do, because the same thing happened to my mother and my grandmother. This is all we know. And so there are generational patterns that have to be broken from time to time, and it takes work, but it takes calling it out, looking at it, looking at all the components of it, and then making a decision that we want the world to be different.
For sure, and a lack of tolerance of it too.
Right. Yes. No bullying zone and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. I mean, people are saying don't judge, but I think sometimes we have to judge.
I think you have to judge if it's harming another person. Something needs to be called out, because as you were describing that principle, that was like a big brother authority figure who was looking out for the little guys. And a lot of times, I think some kids don't feel like anybody's looking out for them, especially those who identify as queer or any marginalized group. They sort of hide often, and they learn to sort of slip around and be quiet, but so that they aren't made the center of bullying or negative attention.
In my high school, there were about 3 or 4 male, and again, it wasn't a big place. There were 3 or 4 male teachers who took it into their own hands to deal with the bullies. Okay. And then what also happened was there was an English teacher, a wonderful person, who had a counseling background, and she was the one who was doing a lot of under the radar counseling of the students who were bullying to try to get to the underlying causes and help them get better. It was an informal system, but it did work. Okay, excellent.
Well, and sometimes, as you were saying, with bullies, they've been bullied themselves, and so it's their way of trying to push back against the bullying they received by harming someone else. But again, it needs to be called out and dealt with.
Absolutely. Okay, so for those of you watching this, we hope you enjoyed it and it was informative. And if you're shopping for a therapist, John Mark Parker, you've gotten a flavor for him and how he works. So thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon, or maybe see you.